Most of you are probably familiar with the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix as being one of the most chaotic races in Formula One history, which included one of the biggest surprise winners of all time, with Giancarlo Fisichella of Jordan winning the race. Some would even argue that the Jordan that Fisichella drove that day was the worst car to win a World Championship race. Is it possible that a car even worse than the Jordan could have won, though? Well, Stoddart of Minardi thought so. After the race, he said, "Today saw possibly the first time ever that Minardi was potentially in a genuine race-winning position. Many people may laugh, but only those of us within the team will ever know the truth. We had the strategy, but not the luck." This was obviously quite the claim that Minardi could have potentially won the race, so I had to do a bit of research. First, though, a brief review of the race in case you're not familiar with it. The race saw heavy rain falling, which immediately caused an issue. In 2003, there was a new rule that the tire manufacturers could only bring one wet compound each weekend as a cost-saving measure. Bridgestone opted to bring an intermediate tire, while Michelin opted for more of a full wet tire. The race began under the safety car for the first 8 laps, during which Fisichella pitted to fill his car with fuel, dropping him from his starting position of 8th to near the back of the field. When the safety car finally let the field go, conditions were obviously difficult, most notably through Turn 3 of the Curva do Sol, where large puddles caught out 6 drivers during the race, including Michael Schumacher, forcing them all to retire. With these crashes, the safety car came out 3 more times during the race, so the field never got extremely separated. With the combination of this, drivers retiring, and other drivers needing to pit for fuel, Fisichella slowly moved up the field the entire day. As the race went on, the track was drying out, which played into the Bridgestone tires' hands, which Fisichella was using, as their intermediate tires were better suited to a drying track than the Michelin's. On lap 52, David Coulthard pitted from the lead, which turned the lead over to his McLaren teammate Kimi Räikkönen, but he was struggling on Michelin tires, trying to hold off the faster Fisichella. Fisichella quickly passed Räikkönen towards the end of the lap, but shortly after that, Mark Webber had a heavy accident on the front straight. After that, Fernando Alonso drove through some of the debris, causing him to have a heavy crash as well. With the track blocked by debris, the race was immediately red flagged, and with over 3/4 distance covered, the race ended. The rules said the results would go to 2 laps before the red flag, and was originally given to Räikkönen, as it was initially determined the red flag was called on lap 55. After an investigation a few days later, it was determined that Fisichella had actually just started lap 56 when the red flag was called, meaning the countback would go to lap 54, which was just after Fisichella took the lead and he was declared the winner. Now that that's covered, where does Minardi fit into all of this? Let's investigate. The Minardi driver that Stoddart thought could win that day was Jos Verstappen. He qualified 19th of the 20 cars, only ahead of his teammate Justin Wilson, but for the race he started from the pit lane with a full tank of fuel, allowing him to run as far as possible into the race. Back then, you had to qualify with the fuel that you were going to start the race on, meaning that Verstappen would be the only driver starting on a full tank of fuel, which was estimated to take him to around lap 57. This meant that the drivers that pitted under the first 8 laps of the race when it was under safety car all rejoined the race behind Verstappen, including Fisichella. By the time the safety car came in, Verstappen was already up to 15th place. The first green flag stint of the race was from laps 9 to 18, and during that stint, he quickly lost places to Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Antonio Pizzonia, but would also gain the 2 places back through a pair of retirements that included his Minardi teammate Justin Wilson. He was falling slightly off the pace of those ahead of him, and was about 3.5 seconds behind Frentzen when the safety car came out in lap 18, but he was pulling away from those behind. Those included Olivier Panis, who he had about a 14-second advantage over, who in turn was holding up the 2 Jordans of Fisichella and Ralf Furman. The safety car was actually brought out for a collision involving Panis and Furman. A few drivers would pit under this safety car period, so during the safety car, Verstappen jumped from 15th to 12th, and was immediately ahead of Fisichella. It would only be another 4 laps until the safety car came out again, but during those 4 laps, Fisichella hung right on the gearbox of Verstappen, keeping the gap under a second, but unable to find a way by. The brief stint also saw 3 retirements, all of which came from spins by Montoya, Pizzonia, and Schumacher, with Schumacher's ultimately being the one to bring the safety car out again. This meant that Verstappen was now running in 9th on lap 27, just 1 place out of the points, but once again, some drivers pitted under the safety car, so Verstappen moved up to 7th for the restart on lap 30. He quickly lost a place to Raikkonen on the restart, putting him back to 8th on lap 31, but that's when it all ended for Verstappen. He spun off at the Curva do Sol, becoming one of the many victims of the corner throughout the day. As we know, Fisichella, who was immediately behind him at the time, would go on to be the eventual winner. Like Fisichella, we know Verstappen was good on fuel to what would become the end of the race, and also like Fisichella, Verstappen would have been on the preferable Bridgestone tires as the track continued to dry as the race went on. However, would Verstappen had enough to actually win the race from that point? Well, in short, my answer is no, but it's hard to predict with 100% certainty. We know that Verstappen was a pretty decent driver in the wet, having a few good drives in wet conditions over the years, so it was conditions that he theoretically would have done well in. We only really have 4 laps of data in which the pair were running together on track, and during those 4 laps it appeared that Fisichella was quicker, keeping the gap between the two under a second. In the earlier stages, Fisichella was stuck behind Pianese, so it's hard to tell what his pace compared to Verstappen was at that point. While the Jordan was not a quick car, it was still quicker than the Minardi that year, so as the track continued to dry out, it probably would have played into Fisichella's hands. Obviously, you can never be sure of something like this in changing conditions, so it's at least possible Verstappen could have had the edge in the drier track, or at least enough to hold off Fisichella behind him. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that since the race ended on countback on lap 54, Fisichella made the pass for the win with just a few corners to go, and won the race over Raikkonen by just under a second. That means that in order for Verstappen to win, he couldn't have even been a second slower than Fisichella was over the course of the final green flag stint, which was 18 laps. Just holding off Fisichella wouldn't have been enough. Going quicker would have been the only way, and that's why I think a win would have been unlikely. With that being said, while a win for Minardi would have been absolutely historic, a win wouldn't have been necessary for the team to have an amazing result. If we look a bit further back, Alonso finished in 3rd, just over 5 seconds behind Raikkonen, and it's probably very possible that Verstappen could have slotted in here, assuming he couldn't hold off Fisichella. Even just a 3rd place finish for the team's only podium would have been a result that would still be talked about today. If we go a bit further back, Jacques Villeneuve finished 6th, just over 16 seconds behind Fisichella, so I'd have to imagine Verstappen would have slotted in here at the absolute worst. Keep in mind that as the race reached the final laps, Verstappen probably would have been one of the quicker cars on track, with Bridgestone tires that were better suited to the conditions at that point. In the end, we'll never know exactly how it would have turned out though, due to Verstappen's spin on lap 31. All we can say with near certainty is that there are points left on the table for a team that rarely scored points. Looking back, where do you think Verstappen could have finished the race had he not spun out? Do you think a win was realistic, or do you think he would have fallen short? I'd be interested to hear what you think would have happened. Thanks for watching.